I want to show one influence right here that is a very powerful one. And you can see this image, which dates back to the time of Robert Flood, which was the 1600s. And you'll see the old metaphor in astrology about as above, so below is really very central to the way I work on all kinds of different levels. And that's actually a pun, but be that as it may. But the idea is really that I discovered a long time ago that it's actually much more than just a metaphor. And that this diagram of Robert Flood's, which is the title piece of a book called Utriusque Cosmi Historia, which roughly has to do with the history of the microcosm. And you'll see from this image that there is a man astride the inner circle, which I'm showing with my cursor. And the idea is that you can see the zodiac signs around the outside of that inner circle. And there's also a sun to the left of his head and a moon to the right of his head, and a series of planetary rings and a series of elemental rings in the very middle. And so you could say that this represents, and it's labeled the microcosm, which means the small world or the inner world. And the dynamic of this is that, and the message of it and the metaphor is that we carry a solar system within our body. And so, again, this was taken at the time as being simply a metaphor. But then you also see there's a ring surrounding the microcosmic inner ring and the human figure, which he labels the macrocosm, which is the large world or the outer world. And you can see also there's a sun and a moon and a series of planetary rings and a series of zodiac signs and a whole cosmos around the outside. In fact, the macrocosm echoes the microcosm. And the idea of Flood's was that we carry a miniature solar system within us, and that is in itself within an outer solar system, in that they reflect each other and maybe even transmit information. Well, when I began working with astrology, I was reading a book. In fact, I was spending a lot of time actually involving myself with a Russian mystic called Gurdjieff, and basically a mathematician called Ouspensky, who was a follower of his. And one of Ouspensky's followers, Rodney Collin, wrote a book called The Theory of Celestial Influence. And it was very, very interesting because Collin was really trying to connect their teaching, which was partially Sufi, it's partially Tibetan Buddhist, it's partially Vedanta. And yet in some way, it actually has a profound resonance with astrology. So if you look at these two circles down below, you can notice that there's a cord, a spiral cord that wraps around the microcosm and the macrocosm 4 times. And that if you look just to the upper right of the lower circle, you see what's called a little putti. And these were like little angels. And you can see he's identified because he's got goat feet, which correspond to Capricorn, obviously, and the planet Saturn. And also he has, on his head, he has a sand clock. Now, you're not likely to recognize that as such, but I've researched it and I know that that's what it is, together with a little cross symbol on the top. In fact, it's actually a symbol, again, of the planet Saturn in ancient alchemical lore. And you see that he's carrying that cord which wraps around the microcosm and the macrocosm 4 times. And in my way of looking at it, what he's doing is that this spiral cord is what's binding the inner world to the outer world. So then the next question is, what is that spiral cord? Well, in order to understand this, I had to really go back to a bit of physics and astronomy. And one of the main ideas was that if you look at the solar system right here, this is an old image of the Milky Way. This has 2 spiral rings that radiate out from the galactic center. I mean, most of the modern thinking is that actually there are 3 rings that spiral out from the galactic center, but the idea really is resonant anyway. You can see where it says our solar system is here, because our solar system is about 2/3 of the way from the center of the Milky Way galaxy to the periphery. And first of all, that's an amazingly vast difference in time and space. In fact, the idea is that the Milky Way galaxy is thousands of light years across, meaning that light takes almost 1,000 years to travel across the Milky Way itself. And the Milky Way itself is just one of billions of galaxies. But the idea is the entire galaxy spins around the center of the galaxy. And if you actually plotted and thought about it, you'd realize that our sun is moving around the galactic center. So instead of just sitting in space with planets in a kind of circle or ellipse around them, what's happening is the sun is moving close to 1 million miles every day, as shown in this diagram here. You can see in the lower diagram that central filament is the sun and its path around the galactic center. And it really looks like if you take a flashlight on a summer night and just, go through letters of the alphabet, if you're distant from that person, you can actually see the trace of the light makes through time. And Collins said that the solar system that moves through time makes a series of nested complex spirals, which you can see here. The little yellow spiral is Mercury, and then the green spiral is Venus, which is a little longer, and then the Earth, which is difficult to see because it's blue against a blue background, basically does orbits about like this. And so the Earth is a green spiral, and this diagram from left to right is 12 cycles of the Earth making its spiral around the sun, i.e., it's actually 12 years. Mars is shown in red, and then Jupiter is shown in blue, and that hazy area between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt. And of course, there are thousands and thousands of asteroids, which is why I show it as a kind of hazy region. And then the outer planets reach around the outside. Well, one of the main dynamics, and you should actually think about this diagram, especially if you're relatively new to astrology, because it's a fantastic learning tool. Because when we're born, essentially our horoscope is a slice through that spiraling solar system at a given time, like I'm showing here, about a third of the way into the right. It's like a slice through that spiraling system with the Earth as the center point. And so therefore, our life is not just that circle or that slice, but rather it's the entire length of the movement of the solar system past that 12 years up until your current age. And if you're 50 years old, you've experienced 50 spirals of the Earth around the sun. And so the mechanism here is that our life is not just that slice, but rather it's a succession of relative slices. As we move through time, all of the planets are continuing to move, which means that although our birth moment is the datum point, meaning it's where it all begins, it isn't the whole process, because our life, in fact, is a process in time.